complaint and to make the case. How does the denial of this type of information affect morale and affect serving members and their families when they can't get the information that they need from the military to be able to carry out a complaint?
So first of all, in the area of law enforcement or judicial proceedings like that, we are prevented from looking at that area in particular, or any criminal matters in that regard. But I think in general, your question in general, you know, being able to access information to be able to support their lives, their careers, or whatever, that is morale damaging when they can't get the information in time. One of the roles of our office is to make sure that we can get that information to them in time and they can access our services if they're finding it difficult to get that information, except for criminal matters.
What about medical information for retiring CAF members?
So we, in some of our previous reports, we outlined some of the issues that we saw with the problems in getting information for the member to access their records and so on, or for VAC to make a judicial decision, or rather a adjudication on their particular benefits. It is better now. They can access those services, access that information as they release, but they still run into some of the similar simple problems, like they give it on a CD perhaps, but many people don't have CD players anymore. So they're working through that issue right now. I think it is getting better, definitely, but whatever it is, they can access their information, maybe not in as timely manner as we would like to see, though.
Okay, are there persistent problems still with those with service injuries, having to then reprove their injury once they discharge from the CAF?
Yeah, and that's one of our recommendations that was not accepted by the department, and that was to have the CAF or the Military Health Services make that decision on service attribution of an injury. We still believe in that, absolutely, because it seems to be the most logical, the most efficient way of doing it, but they've been reluctant to look at that since our report previously.
Wow, why won't they do it?
At the time, and I'll ask Robin perhaps to supplement this, but at the time they brought up the ethical issues of a treating doctor providing that decision. There are ways to get around that. They could have a separate group within the organization do it, separate from the treating doctor, but that was the issue that they brought up at the time.
Right. Does an injured force member take any comfort from that explanation?
I wouldn't say so. I think the point is we want to see retiring members get those benefits that they deserve as quickly as possible, and in fact, get it before they get the adjudication decision before they leave the forces. Yes. So that they have every piece of information, all the benefits in place, all the services in place before they leave.
Right, because we are sometimes talking about members that are discharged for medical reasons, that it's a medical discharge, and then are unable to access benefits for the injuries that were the source of the discharge.
Exactly.
Thank you, Madame Lambropoulos, 6 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. My first question is going to go to Mr. Lick. Thank you for being here with us today. And you mentioned that 5 months ago you had sent a letter, I guess, to the minister regarding mental health. And so I'm wondering, I know you said that you hadn't heard back in 5 months. I'm wondering if prior to this, you had similar experiences, if you actually have written and received responses in a timely manner, if you can comment further on other times that you've tried to communicate with the minister's office.
No, in the history since I started in 2018, we are experiencing the same problems and delays of getting information from the department, in this case the minister and the minister's office, with respect to our systemic recommendations. We know that the department, in our discussions with them, have been working on these these recommendations, whether to implement them or to action them. However, for some reason, we can't get an answer from the department, officially the minister and the minister's office, in a timely manner. And this affects I think more than anything, the transparency of this whole institution. When we made a recommendation, they don't have they have the right to not accept it. Absolutely, that's fine. But at the same time, our defense community deserves an answer, yes or no, absolutely, but we're not getting it in a timely manner. We don't understand why.
Okay, thank you. And you also mentioned that Canada is one of the only countries without a legislative military oversight. And I'm wondering if you can go a little into detail as to how this would be helpful in this case, or in general, in order to improve transparency.
Well, certainly we can provide this committee with a chart of that information, absolutely, for all the world that we have that information. But certainly in the area of the Five Eyes, our most closely linked communities that we work in and countries that we work with, we are the only one that does not have a legislated mandate for its ombudsperson, ombudsman, whatever they call them, inspector general, whatever it might be. And I think what I've said in numerous reports, and my predecessors have said in numerous reports, that more than anything, it is sometimes the perception of interference, sometimes real interference that does occur, that causes our inability to actually action some of the investigations that we carry out. It is also being able to raise issues or escalate issues beyond the minister or the government in power at the time to the Parliament. I can use the media, absolutely. I can talk to all different political parties, but is that really how ministerial accountability should work? I don't believe so. I think I need to report to Parliament to bring these issues to Parliament, whether it's at a committee, whether it's in other ways, but ultimately it is that. But the other aspect is legislation also provides protection for being compelled as a witness in a particular case. That is important. The Correctional Services investigator, as an example, has that. I do not. I will fight back if I'm asked to do that, and I'll fight it in court if I need to, but really that should be protected in legislation to protect the confidentiality of the services we provide to our constituents.
Thank you very much. My next question will go to Mr. Joshi, I've heard different versions. Joshi, I thought so. So we heard about the military grievance process, and we know that in order to improve the culture of the CAF, we need to improve the grievance process and make sure that people are having a fair and timely response. And so I'm wondering if you can suggest any specific improvements that you think that would help us as it relates to access to information.
So one of the big things I would suggest is, as I mentioned before, having all of the grievances come to us discretionary or mandatory, as we call them. And how does this help? First of all, with access to information, it would give all grievers the disclosure they need to have their grievances properly considered. It would give an impartial and independent review back to the Chief of Defence Staff. While it looks like it would take more time to send all of those files to the Grievance Committee, at the end of the day, it saves time in the process. Why? Because what the Canadian Armed Forces gets back and what the member gets back is a fully analyzed file with all the information contained in it, the logic flow of how we arrive at a recommendation and a conclusion and a recommendation. So when it gets back to the final authority, they have that complete file. They can review it, they have an independent opinion on it, and it explains to grievers also why the committee or why we feel their file should be decided in a certain way. So that gives some transparency and boosts confidence in the system.
And so currently you do have to go through regular access to information requests, I imagine, which takes longer?
We do not.
You don't?
For us, in the National Defence Act, there's a provision that when the Chief of Defence Staff refers a file to the committee, the Chief of Defence Staff is required to provide us with all relevant information. And to the extent that we don't get a full file or there's information missing, we have lines of communication with the Canadian Armed Forces that allows us to get that information. Of course, sometimes it takes time because, as we know, grievances are not necessarily the priority of the organization that way. They have an operation to run, but we do have a system in place to get the information back.
How much time do I have left? Okay, well, thank you both very much, and to Ms. Hines, too.
Thank you, Madame Labropoulos. 6 minutes, Madame Normandin.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, 6 minutes. Thank you to the witnesses. Mr. Joshi, I'll start with you because I think it's a follow-up to Madame Lambropoulos' questions. You mentioned that not all grievances are referred to your review committee. On what basis are some sent there and some not? Do you have any idea as to why some are referred and others not? Perhaps through that very selection, could there not be actually embedded in it a lack of transparency, hiding something?
To referrals to the committee, there are two types of referrals, mandatory, obligatoire, and discrétionnaire. The classes of files that must come to the committee are prescribed in regulation. So they are set out, administrative action that affects finances, so forfeitures or deductions from pay, Canadian Armed Forces policies related to political activities, harassment, pay and allowances, and entitlement to medical dental care, and decisions of this where the CDS has made a personal decision. Ce sont des dossiers qui doivent.
These are the types of cases that have to be sent to us, but others are discretionary.
Where the chief has a decision to make based on whether he or she feels that there would be value at the committee and whether he or she feels we have the capacity. So that is completely discretionary. How they choose in between, I'm not entirely sure. But for the obligatoire, on les reçoit.
Those mandatory ones we get, but up until last year, the discretionary ones, we would get almost all of them. But this year, we've received far fewer. Okay, and on these discretionary files that are sent to you, the fact that they are discretionary, couldn't that in some way become a political tool? I'd like to hear your view on that. It could be the case in the sense that if someone has something to hide.
For me, it's, I guess I'm going to call it more in the workflow of the files and where the belief of efficiency lies. But as I've mentioned before, to ensure transparency and to ensure confidence in the system, it certainly would be much preferable that we get all the files.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lick, a few questions for you. On the details with respect to implementing your recommendations, I'd like to get back to that. There's no coercive way to impose follow-ups. How could this play out from a legislative standpoint? How could you impose a follow-up on the recommendations? And do you have any recommendations for the purposes of our report on that?
Yeah, in fact, in legislation, it could be, as with the Auditor General, in fact, their legislation, mandated timelines for responses are a way of making sure that the department does respond in a timely manner. I would come back, though, that that's one way that it could be imparted in legislation, but I would come back to the other part of it is that it doesn't mean that they have to accept those particular recommendations. But we are pretty good at at the work that we do and the recommendations that we put forward. The vast, vast majority are accepted. The implementation is just much slower than I think we would all like to see. But the other part of it is that the way that we impose transparency on the organization is we produce progress reports. Every year, those are updated by the department. We analyze the evidence and show whether the recommendation that's accepted has been fully implemented, partially implemented, or not implemented. That is all public. That's actually a best practice that I would like to see in the rest of the public service.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And on the issue of timelines, as to the reports that you issue, and you were referring specifically to the mental health of reservists, 5 months, no response, would it be conceivable that the timeline for issuing a response would be set, and let's say the minister cannot respond within a time frame, that he would have to explain why he did not?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, we're not naive. Sometimes it does take a longer time to analyze and assess the recommendation and so on. That's absolutely true. And so I would expect at least an acknowledgement of the report. I would expect at least if there's an issue with getting a response back in time that we would receive an explanation. We have received none.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. In the minute I have left, just before the committee we received a number of charts that refer to other ombudspeople in the federal government, and a comparison chart, actually. If you had to say you were a little bit jealous of anything anyone else has, what would that be?
So I think, as I think I've said a number of times, that legislation and the various pieces of the legislation that would stop me from being